American Legitimacy Crisis, Episode 3, Delaware. Spirit of Thersites here. On my History channel, I have frequently observed that the United States is in the midst of a legitimacy crisis. Many observers have lamented this state of affairs, bemoaning the gullibility of people who have fallen prey to conspiracy theories, or question the outcomes of elections. These are symptoms of a legitimacy crisis, but I am more interested in finding the causes. An uncomfortable truth that few public thinkers are willing to face is that the misinformation is only part of the problem. Many Americans have lost faith in the Republic because it no longer represents the interests of the people and does little else besides funnel money to corporations. No legitimacy crisis can begin or continue without unworthy stewards of state. Accordingly, I'm going to go state by state to discuss every nationally relevant elected officeholder in America. We will discuss and then tier rank every governor, lieutenant governor, or close equivalent, U.S. Senator, and member of the House of Representatives, a cumulative total of 635 national political leaders. Many people report hating Congress but liking their individual congressperson. Here I will test the rationality of such a position. Before delving into what is mostly a dishonor roll of political actors, I will examine the politics and socio-political conditions in the state being discussed. Knowing how people make a living, the partisan breakdown in the given area, and other important local trends and tendencies can help us understand why certain individuals are elected and why some officials legislate as they do. Just as importantly, if not more so, we will also consider the ever-present role of money in politics by looking at who pays each of these 635 politicians. My own views are unapologetically leftist and centered around class concerns. If you find yourself bristling at one of my comments or ratings, please know that I take the same amount of responsibility for my words as American politicians take for their actions. None. So, welcome back. It's been a couple months since last we met. And the reason for the long delay is mostly just that I've been very busy teaching, and what effort that I have been able to apply to YouTube has gone to my main channel, which happens to also be linked in with my teaching efforts, so not a surprise there. But this is something that I'm still very interested in, and I'm trying to set up something with a friend to do an episode on Alabama. So I wanted to get this back on track and really start making some headway into the states. Another reason why this has been delayed, I actually tried to do this over the weekend, but for the past couple weeks I've been really suffering with allergies, and that has really affected my throat. So last time when I tried to record this, my throat pretty much failed me about 10 to 15 minutes in, and I had to bail before I got even to the first official. But hopefully tonight my voice will hold. It's been holding all day, and really for the last few days, so I think I will be okay. And if not, it depends on how far I get. If my voice fails me 45 minutes in, I will just croak the rest of it out, because fuck it. I'm not going to start over at that point. When it comes to Delaware, this is the corporate state. That is what it is called because it is the headquarters of many financial institutions, including a lot of credit card companies. It is also the home state of Joe Biden. Not coincidentally, Joe Biden was known as the senator from MBNA during his time as senator, which lasted for quite some time. He was senator from Delaware from the 70s all the way up until his election as vice president in 2008. And as we'll see, there are a whole lot of Joe Biden associates who are still in office in Delaware. In terms of partisan affiliation, Delaware is a deeply Democratic state. Each of the people we'll talk about wins with around 60% of the vote in any given election. Now, this isn't the deepest blue of blue, but it's still pretty damn blue and very consistent. So it is very difficult for Republicans to compete. The last competitive Republican in the state was Mike Castle all the way back in 2010, and unlike many of our current politicians, he decided to retire then after losing a primary at the age of about 70 to 72 years old, which I think is a pretty reasonable age at which to retire. So, hats off to Mike Castle for just having the common sense to retire before he dies and then enjoy his retirement years. I don't know why more politicians don't take that option. I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me as the way to go, but what the hell do I know? So, Delaware, of course, as I mentioned, is a blue state, pretty much dominated by the Democrats at every level. The state does have quite a few problems, and predictably enough, there are plenty of conservative publications on the web which associate Delaware's problems with the Democrats. So, basically, the claim is that if they elected more Republicans, these problems would go away. We've already looked at Wyoming and Kentucky. Kentucky is a competitive state, at least at the local level, and Wyoming is even more Republican than Delaware's Democrat, yet has many of the same problems. So, kind of have to call bullshit on that one. Now, because Delaware has a top income tax rate of 6.6% for households over $60,000, it actually has a little bit less income inequality than America as a whole, which is a surprise. And the reason it's a surprise, as we'll get into, is because, well, the state is heavily dominated by one area, and that one area has disproportionately large amounts of wealth when compared with the rest of the state. So, for instance, the area right around Wilmington and right around Newcastle is Newcastle County. So up in here, this county basically dominates the whole state. The average median income, well, average would be more mean, but the median income is $136,000. And because Delaware is such a small state, we'll get into some more specific numbers in a minute, and because the people living in this area are getting those huge corporate salaries from financial institutions, this very much massively distorts Delaware's overall numbers, to the point that Delaware's per capita income at $66,000 is higher than California and the ninth highest overall. But it is safe to say that there are a lot more well-to-do areas in California than there are in Delaware. In Delaware, there's basically Newcastle County and nothing else. And even within Newcastle County, one town, Newport, lost a lot of jobs from both General Electric and DuPont, and is now down to about an average income of $41,000 to $42,000. So that is something of interest. Delaware once did have something of a blue-collar economy to go along with the finance industry, where you had DuPont, which was very heavily favored at the state level. You also had GE, as I mentioned, a couple other places. Those jobs have long left, and instead what you have left are basically just corporate finance. So, what this means effectively is that, again, the state is very heavily tilted both in favor of corporations because they fund all the candidates, and very heavily tilted in favor of Newcastle County. As we'll see when we get into our candidates, all of them are involved in Newcastle County politics. Literally, if you want to become a nationally relevant figure from Delaware, you pretty much have to live in Newcastle County. If you can rise to the top of the party in Newcastle County, you're guaranteed something. That's really the ticket to the whole state. The rest of the state is politically irrelevant, at least going into a national level. It's also interesting that one of the only two other states we've covered, Wyoming, has a town, or at least a town name in Delaware. I never knew that. Okay. There are also some very poor counties. Not only is there a lot of disproportionate income here, but a lot of counties are dirt poor. Like, sort of almost deep south levels of poor. I mean, not quite, but pretty damn close. For instance, there is a county, Hartley County, which is somewhere in the center, probably not that far from Dover. The average income is only $29,000 a year. There's also Laurel County in the south, presumably near the town of Laurel here, where the income is pretty comparable to that, maybe about $30,000 a year. What's a bit disturbing about Delaware is that despite technically being a little bit more equal in terms of income because it has a higher income tax rate and does not have a sales tax, and of course sales taxes are regressive, so they disproportionately harm the poor. Despite that, and despite the state's efforts to address this inequality through these tax measures, the fact is that poverty is rising in Delaware as of 2018, while falling nationwide at the same time. And actually, by 2018, Delaware had a higher poverty rate than it had during the 2008 recession. Or at least after the, half-assed recovery after the 2008 recession. And that puts its poverty rate up to 13.6% overall, which is not super high, but again, it's rising at a time when the rest of the country, at least a couple years ago, was moving in the opposite direction. I guess we'll see what the numbers are now. I'm not entirely sure how the poverty rate is trending right now because of COVID throwing everything off, but as of 2018, Delaware's trending up, nation's trending down. And child poverty rates. Usually, blue states try to address child poverty more than any other kind, yet Delaware actually has a rising child poverty rate, and at 18.5%, it is higher than the national average of 18%. That's pretty odd. I can't really account for that. I mean, normally there are some things you get for having a blue state. And usually measures to try to address childhood poverty are one of them, but in this case, no, not at all. Another thing that Delaware has going against it, which is absolutely embarrassing, is that most state universities have a majority of students from the state who go there to take advantage of in-state tuition and the fine professors and departments that are offered up by the main university of any given state. And University of Delaware is a pretty decent school, but only 40% of the students there are from in-state. And the president of the University of Delaware blames the K-12 system in the state because students from Delaware are simply not equipped to go there. And as for the rich kids from Newcastle County, they probably all fucking go to Ivy League schools because their parents are loaded and basically corporate lawyers who work for finance companies. So basically, Delaware is very much a state where there no longer is a middle class. You have wealthy financial people, you have the service economy. That's about it. Let's see, what else is of note here? Okay, so one thing that you do get with a lot of blue states, and in this case Delaware fits the mold, is that typically they do a better job than red states at taking care of people who have disabilities. And not a lot of states right now have departments of developmental disabilities. Yet Delaware does have a division of developmental disability services, which seems to be fairly decent and covers a lot of stuff. Interestingly enough, the only reason I know about this is because my girlfriend works for one of these in Ohio, and Ohio, despite being a pretty conservative state in most ways, actually has a fairly generous DDS. But Delaware also has a pretty good one. So that's one thing it does have going for it. There are other states that have basically nothing, Florida being one. Not surprising. I mean, what has Florida ever been good at? So, shock. Let's see. Anything else interesting? So, all governors have been Democrats since 1992 when Tom Carper and Mike Castle switched positions. Very weird thing that happened. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The entire state senate in Delaware, so the state level senate, has been Democratic since 1973. The lower house since 2009. Both of the senators have both been Democrats since about 2010. And I think the House representative has been a Democrat consistently since, I want to say also 2010? Or not, they've held on to the National Senate for longer than that. I don't know the exact dates, but at least probably for the National Senate, at least since 2000. For the House seat, Mike Castle had it for a while, and then he got replaced by someone we'll talk about. So anyway, the point is, Delaware is very blue, but there are differences between the shades of blue, as all of you are well aware, I'm sure. And Delaware only has one shade of blue that makes it to the national scene, and those are kind of social moderates who are very pro-corporate. So So unless you represent the credit card companies and do so well, you're not going to escape Newcastle County and get sent to Washington. Governor Carney, or not, actually Governor Carney's predecessor, was governor during the initial COVID outbreak, and he effectively shut down everything on March 25th, so Delaware had one of the stronger shutdowns. Just like with a lot of places, it didn't actually make as big of a difference as a lot of people expected. So it wasn't super popular at the time, but of course, it's a deep blue state, so yeah, Carney got elected as the successor with no problems. There you go. No big deal. That's the other thing, is one of the most low IQ takes I've ever heard on politics is when a lot of Republicans tried to claim fraud after Gavin Newsom won the recall. So a lot of people have left California, supposedly, complaining about taxes and the liberalism of California. So Republicans left the state that they already had a minority in. Then they tried to do a recall, which often tends to provoke resentment from people and to drive out turnout in favor of the person being recalled. And then they're bewildered that Larry Elder, a radical radio host, can't win an election in a deep blue state. I mean, sure, Gavin Newsom sucks, but they thought a Trump-style Republican would win in California? Are you fucking stupid? Really? What the fuck is wrong with you? Deep blue states hate Trump even more than red states love him. But anyway, let's not talk about Trump. Let's talk about Delaware. A place which would never vote for Trump. Or anybody progressive, actually, in the Democratic Party. Or, frankly, anybody interesting. We're about to cover 5 of the most boring, bland, lifeless sacks of human flesh that I've ever covered on this channel. That's also one of the reasons, low-key, why I've been delaying this. Because I wanted to get some of the small states out of the way to get my feet under me. But it didn't occur to me that some of these guys and gals are god-awfully boring. In terms of demographics, Delaware is 69% white, 22.2% black, 3.9% Asian. And while the state is one of the second smallest geographically, it's the 45th in terms of population. And the population is actually growing at a reasonably fast clip. It's up from 897K in 2010 to 980,000 in 2020. So they're about to hit the 1 million mark. And I think that this might make them eligible for 2 representatives in 2030 if they keep growing at this rate. Of course, because of the obsession with keeping the number of representatives at 435, what this means is that representatives are becoming less and less representative over time. And so I remember when I was an undergrad in the mid-2000s, the number of people per representative was about 750,000 people. Now it's nearly 1 million. So think about that. We're getting less and less representative because of the obsession with maintaining a specific number. Yes, let's just sacrifice representation and democracy on the altar of maintaining artificial numbers. Brilliant shit. Can't imagine why people are upset with the way things are going. Alright, so let's get to today's dishonorable politicians. We have 5 people to cover today: the governor, lieutenant governor, 2 senators, and a representative. I wish I could tell you that some of them are cool or interesting or have a good life story or, well, anything, but I can't. All these people suck and they're boring. So let's start with Governor John Carney. John Carney was a football star in high school and college. He attended Dartmouth, which means that he wasn't that great of a football player, but he was good enough to get a full ride at an Ivy League school, so bully for him. He later earned his Master's of Public Administration from the University of Delaware. His top donors are financial firms: Insurance, AstraZeneca, according to their commercials, they may be able to help. What they mean is they may be able to help people like John Carney. And he also receives a lot of money from the New Democrat Coalition, that group which once backed Bill Clinton, a person we'll be revisiting on my main channel in about a week's time, next Sunday. Of course, New Democrats are known as being pro-corporate, and it's safe to say that the New Democrat model very much has dominated Delaware without any kind of interruption for a very long time. If we look at his donors by individual companies, number one is AstraZeneca, so you can count on John Carney not to say expand Medicare coverage as much as he could as governor. Number 5 is Citigroup, and number 2 is the New Democrat Coalition. So again, this is a man who is seen as being very much a water carrier for the establishment. You could even say he's their star player. He's 65 years old, which in American politics today means that he's about in the middle in terms of age distribution. I guess you could call him average age. Last time he tried to seek the gubernatorial nomination was all the way back in 2008. He did not win, but then he had to wait for Jack Markle to serve his terms. Jack Markle, of course, did that, and then John Carney won in 2020, the nomination and the seat itself. He had 59.5% of the vote. He was the Democratic nominee, so in Delaware that means basically an automatic victory. His career began as Deputy Chief Administrative Officer of Newcastle County. See what I told you. Then he was the Secretary of Finance of Newcastle County, Secretary of Finance of Newcastle County, and later the Deputy Chief of Staff for then-Governor Tom Carper. He served as Lieutenant Governor from 2001 to 9. He was a big advocate of a public smoking ban and healthy activities for kids, so pretty generic shit for lieutenant governors to do. Just the most non-controversial, frankly uninteresting things a person can possibly advocate for. He is an advocate of early and strict shutdowns for COVID. The state of emergency was only ended in July of this year. His economic policies that are listed on his own page are about working with business, improving broadband, which is good, building a new sports complex for a 76ers G League affiliate, so bringing in a minor league NBA team effectively. He also wants to do some work improving low-income schools, and he wants to offer $10,000 of loan relief for teachers who work in areas that have a need for teachers. That would be, of course, in addition to other programs on the federal level which do something similar. So it is a reasonable incentive given the relatively limited resources of a state like Delaware in order to try to get teachers to move to the state in order to cash in on that offer. He also banned single-use plastic bags as his environmental contribution, something that is actually common in sort of rich blue areas, actually. In the town next to us, it is a very rich blue area where people in the primary were really big into Mike Bloomberg and then went for Joe Biden. They also banned plastic bags recently, so that is just something that sort of rich Democrats like to do as their stand on the environment. So, his son was involved in a controversy, a lawsuit for a wrongful death relating to a hazing incident at Clemson University. I don't want to smear Governor Carney with that because obviously that's his son, but I have to imagine that given Carney's connections and his New Democrat status, that his good old friend Jim Clyburn down in South Carolina has been quite helpful in clearing things up for his son. His son has not really been charged with too much because, of course not. The 2016 and 2020 elections were pretty similar in terms of outcome. And John Carney's accomplishment, not surprisingly given that he's a new Democrat in the Bill Clinton mold, is that he managed to turn a state deficit into a surplus, and he is building a savings, which I'm sure that whoever his successor is will then blow on a big tax cut, because that's the way it goes. Of course, his successor will almost certainly be another Democrat, but another pro-business Democrat. If an odd Republican manages to break through, the tax cut then becomes basically a guarantee rather than a likelihood. So, for me, this guy is extraordinarily boring. He's exactly what you would expect for someone in his position. He has surprisingly few issues given that he's a governor of a goddamn state with massive inequality. He did a little bit to address the environment, a little bit to address low-income schools. He's trying to bring in a G League team. I will be generous and give him an E. He's obviously whistling past the graveyard on a lot of important stuff, and the plastic bag ban is a very small drop in the bucket, but it's something. And you know what? It's more than any of his colleagues who are nationally relevant are doing. Spoiler. Alright, next up is Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long. Her top donors include USAA, the Delaware Asian American Business Association, the Delaware Thoroughbred Horsemen's Association. Now, you know you're dealing with a woman of the people when you are dealing with the equestrians. I mean, obviously. No one cares more about the working class than the goddamn equestrians. Anheuser-Busch and Microsoft. Bethany Hall Long has a BSN in nursing from Thomas Jefferson University. She then got her MSN in public health nursing. And she went to the Medical University of South Carolina to get a PhD in nursing and public policy. Or wait, no, then she got her MSN in public health nursing was from the Medical University of South Carolina. Then she got a PhD in nursing and public policy from George Mason. That's how it went. So, one of the more educated people we'll talk about today. So, impressive credentials, medical field. She was in the State House from 2002 to 8. She was in the State Senate from 2008 to 17. And she's been lieutenant governor since 2017. And she now has a job until 2025. She was teaching as a professor in Delaware for a while before she got elected lieutenant governor. So she was at the University of Delaware itself with 40% in-state students while she was still in the state senate. So something kind of similar to what Obama was doing when he was a state senator in Illinois. So not unusual. Let's see. She doesn't have very many issues, and that's not surprising. We've seen this as a fairly common thing, especially with lieutenant governors in safe states. They tend not to really stand for anything. They're just kind of there, and ultimately they will be able to mold themselves to the cultural concerns of the moment and run for governor later. So Bethany Hall Long is she's pro-choice. In the 2000s, when she was in the state legislature, she did well with gun groups, but now she's down to a 42% from the NRA. Not surprising. Couple reasons. The gun divide as a cultural issue has very much gotten more strident between the two sides, and the NRA is no longer trying to hide the fact that it's basically just a branch of the Republican Party, and that they're not really about guns, they're just the National Republican Association at this point. Because literally, I don't think you get hired on a D if you're a Democrat at this point in time. It's damn near impossible. No matter how conservative you are on guns. I think Joe Manchin has like a D at this point. For fuck's sake. She has a 12% rating by the American Conservative Union. So that means that on social issues, she's considered to be relatively liberal. But that's actually not too unusual because, again, we're in a time of strident partisanship. So most people tend to be on the ends when judged by these institutions. She has an 87% from the Delaware Chamber of Commerce. So this means that, basically, a group that normally gives very poor ratings to Democrats likes her. That tells you everything you need to know about her affiliation. She is a corporate Democrat to the core. Socially liberal, economically conservative. I'm sure she'll try to run for governor or senator or representative at some point in the future. Yay. Her husband, Dana, is a Navy veteran. He was arrested in 2014, or was it 19? I can't read my own writing. Either way, what he did was he took down some Republican signs from the yard that he didn't want to see there. Someone else's yard, I presume. He got arrested. Apparently that was a scandal. Partisan people being partisan. What a story. News at 11. Glad he got arrested for that, but still, it's not a story. Not interesting. She did lose an election back in 2000, her first election, but she's unbeaten ever since. Among the other things that she really wants to do that are highly specific on her website, she wants to reduce healthcare costs. How does she do it? Who the fuck knows? She never says. Encourage blockchain financing. So yeah, financial experimentation. And an economy that runs like a casino. And center it in Delaware. Yay. Let's have another financial crisis. That sounds fun. She also wants tech firms to come to Delaware. So one of the new biggest constituents of the Democratic Party in the last 20 years, Silicon Valley, why not come to Delaware and combine with the blockchain people? You know, combine finance and tech. These two great things. Who cares if this won't create any jobs for regular people and they'll continue to be left behind? Let's just make jobs for the elite and just keep pouring in the money to Newcastle County and fuck everybody else over. And she wants to use the University of Delaware and Delaware State as tools for business. So she kind of has the Scott Walker idea of how universities should function. Which, given that she has a PhD, is a goddamn shame. Bethany Hall Long. I forgot to see how old she is. I think she's around 60 even. I'm not going to look it up because she doesn't matter. She's an F, though. Next up, we have Senator Tom Carper. He has been in office now for 20 years. He got elected to the Senate in 2001, and he's got a long history in Delaware politics going back a hell of a long way. He is 74 years old at present. He works in the Environment and Public Works Committee, Finance, Homeland Security, and Government Affairs, so he is one of the more influential senators, not just because he is a Biden friend, but also because he's got a lot of seniority, he's well connected, and he's on a lot of key committees. So while he's not the best known of the Delaware politicians right now, he's easily the most important. However, while everyone we're talking about is very, very, very goddamn corporate, Tom Carper is 100% corporate in terms of his support. This is a man who, if you had to put the little patches on their suits to represent who he represents, well, he'd run out of space. He'd have to get like a backpack attachment. So, by industry, he gets a lot of money from insurance. That's number one. Number two, securities and investments. Number three, law firms. Specifically, I looked this up. We'll talk about it, but these are all law firms that are corporate firms that are there to fuck over labor and protect corporations from losing their copyrights. Number four, pharma. And number five, leadership PACs. And he vastly outperforms most other senators in fundraising, especially in 2020. I want to say he is one of the top 5 fundraisers in the Senate. So this is a man who knows how to polish the corporate knob better than most. If he's got a talent, it's that. From 1982 to 92, he served as the Delaware representative. So he was the House Representatives member, the one and only. He then effectively swapped jobs with Mike Castle who had been governor. Tom Carper became governor. Castle became the rep. As governor, basically Tom Carper was a continuation of Mike Castle. New Democrats and Republicans aren't terribly different. He was elected to the Senate in 2000 after his 2 terms as governor. He ousted the Republican incumbent, William Roth, so I was wrong. It's not just Mike Castle, William Roth, also Republican, apparently. And then he won re-election in landslides in 2006, where the Democrats won big. 2012, where Obama was on the ticket. And in 2018, which was not a good year for Democrats, but he was in Delaware. One interesting thing about Tom Carper, the only interesting thing about Tom Carper, he is the last Vietnam veteran in the Senate. Interestingly enough, he is not a native son of Delaware. He was born in West Virginia, grew up in Virginia, then moved to high school in Columbus, Ohio, where I live, and then attended OSU, where I got my PhD, graduating in 1968. He did Naval ROTC. He then came back, got his, so he got a BA in economics at OSU, came back home after the war, got an MBA at University of Delaware, Master's of Business Administration. He was state treasurer from 77 to 83. And one of his mentors early on, someone who wanted him to run, was Joe Biden. And just as a side note, his high school here in Columbus is one that is right next to a library I used to use all the time, Whetstone. So I found that interesting. Got that deep connection to Tom Carper. That's always great. And if I had to really characterize this guy, he's the kind of dude who avoids controversy and headlines, but he's very powerful. In that sense, he's kind of like Jim Clyburn prior to the 2020 primary, where he came out of the shadows. So he's someone who's really important and powerful, but he's one of those guys you don't really hear about, and he likes it that way. So, at OSU, he was a Eugene McCarthy supporter, and just like many boomers, he then became much more conservative over time, and eventually abandoned anything resembling principle in order to completely and utterly rape the working class. Tom Carper, in the 1980s, overthrew the Democratic Party boss, who was an iron worker, in favor of a DuPont executive. So he was the guy who engineered that overthrow. And effectively what this did is it broke any kind of relationship that the Democrats in Delaware had with labor or blue-collar workers. Again, Tom Carper is a new Democrat, so he is working to sever the ties between the Democrats and labor and just go polish corporate knob. So he does that very effectively, and that has been his career for over 40 years. And this also set up the current system where Newcastle County runs everything in the state full stop. So Tom Carper had a lot to do with that during his time in the county and then later as governor. So in many ways, the problems with Delaware, not all of them can date back to Tom Carper, obviously. Things are never that simple. But if you had to put a single face on it, it is the face of Tom Carper. Everything we talked about earlier. The poor school performance, the extreme inequality, the corporate whoring that the state does, all of that ultimately is mostly a Tom Carper project. Well, Joe Biden had a big role to play as well, and a number of other people. Mike Castle, the aforementioned, also was the Republican side of that. In the Senate, he was a fiscal conservative and ally of Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney. So he portrays himself as a moderate, But unlike Manchin and now Kirsten Sinema, who seems to really get off on being despised, Tom Carper likes to do despicable things, but do so without people knowing. He doesn't like publicity, as I mentioned. So he's basically the same as Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema, but he doesn't want people to call him. So if you get a chance, give him a call. That'd be my advice. Write him a letter. He is in favor of Keystone XL, but then, of course, he came to regret it, as it turns out most Democrats are against it, so now he claims he regrets it. He really wanted to, in 2010, give the president very heavy control of the internet. So there was an effort to crack down on internet freedoms back in 2010. Tom Carper was at the front of that. He's also been very consistent in his stance against the minimum wage over the years. So he's voted on many occasions, recently and going back, against minimum wage hikes. And you would think, given that he's from a state with extreme inequality, and that he's supposed to be a Democrat, that you might expect him to vote for those things. But you got to remember, he's a new Democrat. He's a Democrat who exists to fuck over workers and for no other reason. He's against Obama's job creation bill, or he was. And he favors deficit reduction. So again, this is a generic corporate Democrat. This man sucks. He's a stain in the underwear of American politics. And he's an F. Alright. I'm feeling the throat now. I'm not 100%. Okay. Next up, someone you probably heard of. Recently, he has been touted as Joe Biden's go-to guy in the Senate and a Biden protege. Carper's not really considered a Biden protege because they're not that different in age, so it'd be kind of weird. But Chris Coons is quite a bit younger than Biden at 58, despite the fact that he looks like Todd Packer from The Office. His top donors: lawyers and law firms, securities and investments, real estate, leadership PACs, and pharma. And Chris Coons holds the honor of being the #1 recipient of student loan companies. So, of all the people student loan companies give money to in the Senate, this man is #1. So if you're laboring under student loan debts, and you wonder why the Democrats won't act on this, think one of Joe Biden's best friends, who is working day and night to make sure that the student loan crisis goes unaddressed. So be sure to send Chris Coons a letter and thank him for all that he does to make your life worse. The top law firm that gives him money is the corporate firm Young, Conway et al., or is it Conaway? Who gives a fuck? Anyway, they focus on bankruptcy, corporate litigation, business taxes, and intellectual property. So again, they're there to defend corporate America and fuck over the common man. If a common person is going to sue a company to get compensation for some corporate abuse, these assholes are there to defend that company. So, a great group of guys there, and they back Chris Coons. So, wonderful. He was the county executive of Newcastle County. Ringing any bells yet? He earned a BA at Amherst in chemistry and political science. Pretty interesting combination, I will grant him that. He then went to Yale Divinity School and earned an MA, and then later a JD from Yale Law School. So, very diverse educational background. And by the way, the Divinity School stint, Chris Coons is morbidly religious. He is extremely Catholic. And while his stances are socially liberal, he's someone who really, apparently, legitimately suffers personally from being pro-abortion. But we have to remember, he has to hold the line for his party because it's necessary to vote for abortion, so that way his corporate friends can continue to extort people on loans. I mean, you got to make sacrifices. That's in the Bible. Okay. And actually, I actually, just to be clear, of course, I am socially liberal myself, so I'm glad that Coons has those stances, but still, I find it odd that he is willing to, given how religious this man is. Like, this man is religious to the point of making other people around him in the Senate uncomfortable. But it's amazing to me that this guy is willing to take this personal hit on something that clearly matters so much to him, that causes him personal anguish, in order to advance a corporate agenda. So, I mean, this man is a true believer, both in the sense of believing in fairy tales and in terms of being a bag man for corporate America. And I take a certain amount of pleasure in the fact that he has pain and has some conflict internally. Because this guy fucking sucks. He has done some missionary work. Before he went to Yale, he worked in Kenya and South Africa. He then worked at W.L. Gore and Associates as an in-house counsel, i.e. as an attorney who tells them how to get out of trouble when they fuck shit up. This company is best known for making Gore-Tex, which is a high-level product that protects you from the cold. I used to have to use this a lot when I lived in Alaska as a kid, so I'm very familiar with Gore-Tex. And actually, at the time he worked at Gore-Tex, that's approximately the same time I was using their products. So I guess I also have this cosmic connection to Chris Coons. Okay. His focus at W.L. Gore was on political advice, so basically this is someone who had connections. As a teenager, he was a big Ronald Reagan fan, so he was part of the religious group that went over to Ronald Reagan, but he became a Democrat by 2000, I guess because he lived in Delaware, and he looked around and he said, what the fuck's the difference, really? The difference is, in Delaware, Democrats actually win elections, so it should just be one of those. Sure, I'll have to say I'm pro-abortion, but aside from that, I won't really have to change anything, so fuck it. And, let's see. As county executive, he balanced the budget with a surplus by raising taxes and cutting spending. So, sort of something that a lot of Democrats in the new Democrat coalition do. They obsess over balancing budgets as if it's the 1920s. And unlike Republicans, they are willing to raise taxes, so I mean, I guess that's a good thing, sort of, but I don't know. It's just not really that impressive. Let's see. What else does Coons do? Okay. And he also pledged not to raise taxes when he ran for county commissioner. So, again, this is a man who, despite his morbid religiosity, can very easily pull off hypocrisy. So, great. The Jesus juice runs strong with him, but apparently just not up strong enough, huh? Okay, in 2010, he won a Senate seat. And mostly he won the nomination because he's a Biden protege. Biden really likes him and wanted him to be his successor. And the Republican side had a very interesting primary in 2010. So Republicans won big in 2010. What a lot of people forget is that they underperformed just a bit because some of the people who came out for their party were absolute fucking lunatics. And they managed to win some of the primaries and then lost in races that otherwise they could have won. One of them was Sharon Angle out in Nevada, the chicken for checkups lady who lost to Harry Reid. And another one was a person named Christine O'Donnell who managed to beat Mike Castle for the nomination. So basically the seat went from having a 100% chance of going to Mike Castle rather than the nobody Chris Coons running in 2010, which was a very Republican year, to basically being the exact opposite, a 100% chance of Chris Coons. And the reason is, Christine O'Donnell was the famous person from the I'm Not a Witch ad, and before that she went on Bill Maher's show in the 90s when she was a teenager as an anti-masturbation activist, a stance which to the best of my knowledge she still holds to this day. So Chris Coons ran against someone who wanted to stop masturbation. That's how he won. If he had run against Mike Castle, Castle almost certainly would have won. So he got lucky. And he had the connection to Joe Biden. That's how he got where he was. Although Coons is Gen X rather than a boomer, he had a similar path when compared with, say, Tom Carper, because back in 1985 in college, he considered himself a Marxist, and he wrote some things in a school paper to that effect that's been used against him over the years. Clearly now he is not. He's a corporate errand boy par excellence. He had to beat a progressive challenger in 2020. He did that easily. And then he had to run against a QAnon person in the general. And basically this was a repeat of the Christine O'Donnell race. So this is someone who has never really had to fight for his office in any meaningful way. Delaware is very, very safe for corporate Democrats. They're safe against both progressive challengers from the left and from Republicans, especially when Republicans think, so the state is heavily stacked against us. We should take somebody who's an absolute goddamn lunatic and run them. Just see what happens. I don't know. So yeah, there you go. He's had a very easy run of things. He has been considered for a couple of other appointments. Apparently back in 2016, I assume after the Merrick Garland debacle, Obama briefly considered putting Coons on the Supreme Court. I don't think he's an accomplished enough lawyer to merit that. He's just some corporate dipshit, but whatever. And he was considered for Secretary of State in 2020, but Joe Biden decided not to do that because Chris Coons is his guy in the Senate, so he wanted to be his point man. And Chris Coons got a fair amount of publicity after the election as Biden's dude in the Senate. He is pretty close with Biden. They meet pretty regularly. They are legitimately friends. It's not just that they're from the same state. I mean, that relationship is real. Chris Coons, not surprisingly, given that he is a corporate candidate in a corporate state, has consistently been against raising the minimum wage, so yet another Democrat who's there to fuck over workers. And while he plays an environmental protector and talks a good game on that front, which is one reason why people sort of tolerated him for a while, even though he sucks ass on labor, an Exxon official recently revealed that they have very frequent meetings with Chris Coons, and that Chris Coons is in the bag for Exxon. And that he works behind the scenes very hard to weaken environmental legislation during behind closed doors. So Chris Coons behind closed doors really works to undermine environmental protection while talking a good game in public. And that is something that's only been revealed in the last couple months. In terms of his other stances, he is a free trader all the way, so he's in favor of free trade deals, including the ones which cause jobs like the ones at GE and DuPont to leave Delaware, and thereby destroy what was the middle class there. And he's also against right-to-work legislation, at least in theory. My suspicion is that much like his environmental stance, he is secretly in favor of right-to-work, which of course makes it much, much more difficult to join a union. And because of that, it makes me very suspicious of the people who honestly believe Joe Biden wants to help union drives in America. Because Chris Coons and Tom Carper, two of his closest associates, are dedicated foes of labor. Especially organized labor. Hell, any labor. Anybody who's not a corporate executive is someone they have no interest in whatsoever. Chris Coons is an F. He makes America worse. And he does so with a smile on his uncharismatic face. Last, and probably not least, which is saying a lot here, well, I guess isn't saying much, Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester, the only person of color from the Delaware delegation. Kind of makes sense. Delaware is about 22% black. There are 5 officials here. One of them is black, 20%. Actually, it actually works out mathematically, I guess. Because people are really obsessed with the politics representation. At least they were going into the 2020 cycle. So I guess Delaware passes that one test. The corporate state passes this superficial test. So there you go. Okay. Lisa Blunt Rochester is 59 years old. She replaced Carney in 2016. Carney had been the had been the House rep. So actually, yeah, John Carney was the governor when those COVID measures were put in place. I fucked that up. Delaware politicians, like I said, are boring. And I actually did the research for this about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago. I had to delay because of allergies. When I tried to do it a few days ago, my throat completely defeated me. My mind was ready. My body was ready. Just not my throat. Okay. So, Lisa Blunt, Rochester, you might think this might be the one person who might represent average people at least a little bit. I mean, after all, she's a black person, and usually people of color have a little bit more struggle in their life than white people. But not her. So Lisa Blunt, Rochester, comes from Philly, and then she moved to Wilmington, Delaware in 1969. Her family is well off. She attended Padua Academy, and then she went to Villanova. She got married to a professional basketball player who played in Europe. So she spent some time in Europe, and then came home and went to the University of Delaware for a year. Oh wait, no, she went to Villanova, then University of Delaware, then went to Europe, then came back after she split up with her husband, and came back to get a BA in International Relations from Farley Dickinson University. Then she got an MA in Urban Affairs and Public Policy from the University of Delaware. She began her political career in earnest as an intern to Tom Carper in 1989. She was on the transition team for him when he served as governor. He was elected in 92. He was literally the Bill Clinton of Delaware, as we've discussed. So if Chris Coons owes everything to Joe Biden, then Lisa Blunt Rochester is the Chris Coons to Tom Carper. Let's see, what else did she do here? Under Tom Carper, she was the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Health and Social Services in 1993, and then she transitioned over to being the Delaware Secretary of State, or Secretary of Labor in 1998. And the next governor appointed her to be State Personnel Director in 2001. Then she left in 2004 to be the CEO of Metropolitan Wilmington Urban League. So she went into the private sector, at least sort of nonprofit sector. And later on, when she was elected to Congress, she was celebrated as the first woman and first black representative from the state of Delaware. So that is her claim to fame and history. When she was sworn in, she had her great-great-great-grandfather's Reconstruction-era voter registration card sewn into her scarf. That's actually pretty cool. So kudos for that. I wish she had done more. I wish that her value went beyond the symbolic, but it doesn't. She was a 2020 co-chair for Joe Biden, not surprisingly. She was on the VP committee, so she helped to select Kamala Harris, one of the most inspired and brilliant picks in history. Let's see, where does she get her money? Well, her top firms are Young, Conaway, and et al. So again, that corporate firm which protects corporations from their own crimes. Also McCarter and English, same thing. Richards, Leighton, and Finger, same thing. All of these are major corporate firms based in Delaware, which are there to protect corporations from having to pay taxes and obey the law. She also gets a lot of money from Blue Cross Blue Shield and from Comcast. By industry, lawyers and law firms, not surprisingly, given that those are our top three. Health professionals, which I don't think insurance companies are fucking health professionals, but I guess that's just a misnomer that we are going to live with, aren't we? Yeah, you're a professional because you sell insurance. No. If you're not a doctor or a nurse, you're not a health professional. Fuck off. Anyway. Real estate, retired people, and insurance. So far as I can tell, and I looked for about 20 minutes on this, that's about all the time that I had to dedicate to this person. Lisa Blunt Rochester, to the best of my knowledge, has no signature issues. She's literally the definition of a backbencher and a go-along-to-get-along politician. She's there because of who she knows, not what she knows. And the only reason she's there is because she's part of the Newcastle gang. She's part of the Delaware establishment. She knows Tom Carper. She's got connections to Joe Biden. So, that's the only reason she's in office. She has nothing to contribute of value. No original thoughts. And just like Chris Coons, she's in her late 50s. She's 59. She'll still be around a while. I'm sure in the future she'll either be governor or lieutenant governor or senator. So they just kind of play musical chairs with those offices in the state. She's an F. So anyway, those are the rankings of the Delaware politicians. They all fucking suck. Next time we'll look at Alabama. I'm sure things will really pick up and improve when we look at Alabama. My friend Paul will be there, so we get to meet Paul. And like I said, I'm really optimistic. I'm sure Alabama will really surprise us with how many exalted and accomplished people they have in public office. So anyway, until next time, I'm Spirit of Thersites, and I will see you around.